Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about government and accountability. Abraham Saleh's concern for the government's current overall situation led him to a major claim which stated the following. Lack of accountability or consequences for the executive branch of government, specifically the presidency, has led to a complete breakdown of the political system intended by America's nation's founding fathers. Abraham also stated that there exist three reasons for which someone does not do something, including physical consequences, moral or ethical consequences, and artificial consequences as known as laws. In his speech, Abraham emphasized that the government system is broken mainly because of a sick abuse of power from the executive branch of the government, and also the lack of fulfilling promises made in the presidential race. My main claim is that although some of the cases presented in this speech were true, there is still not enough evidence to show that there has been any abuse of power from the executive branch. In the advocate's speech, he quoted as one of his main points. Sick abuses of power, the system of checks and balances has been disordered to the point where the executive isn't checked and the Constitution is overridden by orders. He also said some examples, and this is my response to these examples. Guantanamo Bay case. Barack Obama signed an executive order on January 22, 2009 to close it within a year, but in May 2009, both the House of Representatives and the Senate voted to keep the detainees held in the Guantanamo prison from being transferred to the United States. Both the House of Representatives and the Senate have to vote in order to change along the country. Therefore, there is no abuse of power from the executive branch. It has been the United States Supreme Court that changed its position in this issue. In 2006, the Supreme Court said the Geneva Convention does not apply to the prisoners. A month after, they stated all detainees held in the United States military custody around the world are entitled to protections under the Geneva Convention, including human rights and the right to trial. His second example that he listed on his speech was the Watergate-Nixon case. There is irrefutable evidence that show the crimes which ex-President Nixon was involved in, but up to date there has not been another president who shows the same behavior and the same level of scandal. Therefore, how has this case influenced the recent executive branch? And something else is that Richard Nixon ended up resigning his position. The third example that he listed is the Patriot Act case. The Patriot Act was passed right after the September 11 attacks without a debate. Foreign intelligence surveillance have provided an exception to the Fourth Amendment requirement that surveillance warrants require showing of probable cause. The purpose of the exception was to allow enforcement regardless of foreign intelligence. Federal agencies would not be able to use surveillance warrants as a means to spy on Americans. To obtain one of these permits, law enforcement has to prove that the surveillance target is an agent of foreign power. That's how they call it. In 2003, 1,008 adults over the age of 18 were asked to respond whether the government had made a good assertion about the Patriot Act or if it went too far. 49.2% of these people said that the government had been about right. 23.6% said that it went too far, and 17.7% said that the government had not done enough to keep the nation's security. His claim number 2 was the lack of fulfilling promises made in the presidential race. Number 1, according to the advocate, the president promised no tax increase for families making under $250,000, and he sort of related this to the cap and trade case. I found a visible relationship between this cap and trade proposition and the tax increasing for families that make under $250,000. The cap and trade is a long-term goal that will stimulate the economy of the United States as well as taking care of the natural environment. President Obama made about 20 promises involving the economy economic future of the country. Out of those 20, only one has been broken. 5 of them have been kept, which includes the extended unemployment insurance and temporary suspended taxes for these people, and 10 are under the works, including the one promising the tax increasing of 15% to 20% for families making more than $250,000, and 4 of them are labeled as compromised. He also talks about the healthcare reform, and no healthcare bill has been passed by both the Senate and House of Representatives. How can the President fulfill this promise immediately when he does not have concrete solution yet? These arguments contradict Iverson's claim number 1, because the executive branch is showing an opposite image. If there was an abuse of power from the President, President Barack Obama would have already passed as many bills as he pleases to, without the consent of the Senate and House of Representatives. This to also keep the President from taking some actions until they both agree that a law should be changed or created. Why is this responsibility falling on the President only, when the Constitution establishes the role of each one of the 3 political powers as well as their duty to work as one? On his point number 3, he said the executive isn't checking and accountable to the people. This point goes back to the major claim without any evidence or clear specification on how the President is accountable. Therefore, I cannot argue something that does not have an argument. As a conclusion, there exist issues that need to be resolved as soon as possible, and although the President has the last word when adding a new law, it does not mean that all presidents in general have abused their power or break the system founded by America's nation fathers.
All right, all the structural stuff is pretty solid. You're focusing primarily on talking about the advocate's evidence on the first point. You have a general criticism on each of those points. On the Guantanamo Bay thing, you have a cause-effect claim that the reason has little to do with the President going back on his word. The court rulings also suggest that there's some balance that's going on there, which I think is the general argument that you're suggesting, especially on the second point, and that is that all 3 branches of government take responsibility for the way things are getting run, and that one of them cannot override the other. They have to work in congruence, and there's got to be some balance there. And in fact, if one of them did act without the other, that's the kind of abuse that you would get from that the advocate's talking about, and that's clearly not what's going on in that case. On the Watergate argument, you've got a challenge on the recency of the argument. I think you want to point out that it was more than 40 years ago, so it's not necessarily very typical. I thought you had a reasonable challenge that there haven't been secondary issues or subsequent abuses of power that would fit into that category, at least none that have been demonstrated. On the Patriot Act argument, you've got an explanation about what the limitations are there. The public opinion on it seems to suggest that there's a disagreement as to whether or not this is seen as an abuse of power, so I guess that that's relevant on that point. On the next point about Obama or other presidents going back on their word, this is where you come up with that analysis that I thought worked really well, and that is that the President can't act unilaterally, and to do so would in fact violate the first part of the argument that there's some abuse of power. So I thought you explained that pretty clearly. You did have some information about the President breaking only one of the 25 promises that he made. I didn't get a source citation on that, so you want to make sure that you give us that. And I think that you want to kind of clarify a little bit more that this is in fact a process that has to go through compromise and negotiation, and this is a political decision. It's not necessarily a power issue. It's, you know, that kind of thing, and I think that would put it into a little more context. All right, thank you.